I will now call to order the Tuesday, April 1st meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council Fiscal Committee. I'd like to welcome all those here in attendance at Carnegie Town Hall, those following the meeting on Channel 16 or at siouxfalls.org. I would now entertain a motion for approval of the minutes of the November 5th.
So moved. Second, Entenmann.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the November 5th, 2013 meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Today we have one presentation, order of business. Chad Heavey from Public Works has agreed to come in and speak to the committee. He will highlight, his presentation will highlight how street construction projects are selected by Public Works, and he will also discuss contractor incentives and disincentive programs. Welcome, Chad.
Good afternoon. Chad Heavey with the Engineering Division of Public Works. Before I get into the presentation, first of all, I just want to highlight an award we recently received from the Associated General Contractors of South Dakota, and this was done at their state convention in January, but it was presented to the City of Sioux Falls. It is the 2013 Build South Dakota Award, Category 3, which means it's greater than $2 million, and we received it for the 57th Street and Western Avenue reconstruction project. And it says, for outstanding highway heavy utility construction performed on the West 57th Street and Southwestern Avenue reconstruction in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So I would just like to say thank you for your support, and I think it was a very good project.
Thank you, Chad. Congratulations.
There you go. And then the second item, I'm going to be, as I go through the presentation today, I'll be maybe referring to the 41st Street project that's underway, and I just brought a map here to, if we want to talk about anything or point anything out, so it is there. All right, so I didn't want to call this wasn't my original title of the presentation, but really it's kind of the things we do behind the scenes of planning and thinking about how we're going to schedule the project. So first of all, how do we prioritize things? First of all, our arterial streets. There is an existing executive order that discusses and kind of outlines the things we're going to look at, but we're looking at the number of residences or the number of businesses that are on this street or will be on the street. We're looking at existing or future public facilities, such as a school or any proposed industries that'll be coming to the city. We look at existing and future traffic volumes, the number and types of accidents, the project cost is another factor, and then how much of the property is in the city limits versus out, and then how does it connect into our existing transportation system. And over the past couple of years, we've met with several industries, developers, business owners to talk about their arterial street needs, and that also goes into our prioritization. Now on the local and the collector streets, there's probably three main things we look at, and that is the condition of the pavement, the condition of the utilities, and then the accessibility for everybody in those areas. And so the condition is based on the overall condition index, and we have staff that go out every year, do visual inspections. That information is plugged into our software system, and it calculates an OCI number. And the point of this is to do the right improvements at the right time to keep the roads in good condition and maximize the life. And so, but that's not the only thing we're looking at. We also got to look at the utilities, because when we do an overlay or mill and overlay, that's the time we go in and make some minor utility repairs. So at maintenance, we're talking about the microsurfacing, the techcrete, the concrete joint repairs, so the mill and overlay. So those are the things we look at when we prioritize those projects. Then design starts, and I'll just say that The earlier we start, the better. There's just a lot of things that have to happen in that design phase. On 41st Street, for example, you have several individual homeowners, you have several businesses. We have to look at the lane configurations, where do we want turn lanes, how much right-of-way do we need to acquire to build the structures and the roads. Always there's private utility coordination, federal and state funding or permitting that has to happen. And for example, the project on 41st Street, our first contract with our engineer was for preliminary design and a drainage study, and that was done in June of 2010. And we needed every month of that to get the project where we are today. So the earlier we start, the better. Okay, now scheduling. I'll say we have 8 months in South Dakota or in Sioux Falls for construction, and that really depends on the weather. And so it could be 7, it could be 6, but we're just going to assume today that it's 8, and it's April through November. Part of our general conditions, we expect that there's going to be several adverse weather days throughout the construction year, and so that can range from anywhere from 42 to 54 days, depending on the type of work's going on. So now we've subtracted that amount of time off of our 8 months. Then we're always working around public events, whether it's something downtown, it could be something at Yankton Trails Park, it could be the marathon. There's always large sports tournaments going on, so we're always thinking about those in the back of our mind. And then, of course, we have several schools. And so that, any construction near the school, that's narrowed down to about 90 days. So just a few examples of how these events play in. This year, we'll be reconstructing the intersection of 41st and Sertoma Avenue. Of course, Roosevelt High School is right there, and so we'll probably start in that intersection May 15th, and we have to be done by August 18th. So there's the window of opportunity we have to do that particular work. A few years ago, when we were doing a lot of our sanitary sewer work, we had to cross Cliff Avenue just north of I-229. We closed the street down as soon as Lincoln let out for the day on a Friday, and the contractor had the road back open Monday morning. But we put the pipe in, we put back a temporary asphalt section so we could have school again Monday, and we came back during the summer then and took the asphalt out and replaced it with concrete. So another example of how we had to work around schools. And then finally, another project this year, it's the 57th Street overpass, bridge approaches. And of course the bridge is fixed, but when you load that much soil onto anything, there's going to be some settlement. So there is an asphalt piece in there that we knew would settle, and now it's time to come back and tear that asphalt out and put concrete in. But something we did is we give the contractors for 35 days. And now they can do the work anytime during the year, but once they start, they have 35 days. And what that allows us to do is the contractor can bid that, and maybe that's the first thing he wants to do for the year. Or maybe he's got a big job that he's wrapping up this year, and this works out perfect that he can do in July or August or September. So we kind of give him the flexibility, or them the flexibility, to do this work when it works in best for their schedule. It's a great filler job, and we get better prices in when we have more flexibility. And that's what it kind of comes down to is when you have a shorter window for construction, sometimes the prices are going to be higher. But in this case, yes, it's a major commuter route, but there isn't a school or anything like that close. So in this case, it worked out for us to schedule it that way. Okay, liquidated damages. It's the daily amount set forth in the contract, and it's deducted from the contract price, and it's there to cover additional costs incurred because of the contractor's failure to complete the work by the set completion date. Our table is based on the Department of Transportation's book, their document. We've incorporated into our general conditions for all of our improvements, and it's based on $250 a day up to $2,300 per day, and it's all based on the contract amount. So I think a project from $0 to $50,000 is at $250 a day. I think something over $10 million is where that $2.3 million or $2,300 per day would come into play. And then what we've began to use recently in town is incentives and disincentives. And this again is a contract provision which compensates the contractor a certain amount of money for each day identified critical work is completed ahead of schedule. And then it likewise assesses a deduction for each day the contractor overruns that specific time. And we look at these incentives, disincentive clauses when we're working on an area that sees a lot of traffic. There could be a lot of traffic delay. We've used them on the 41st Street Bridge replacement. Worked very well. 57th and Western Avenue that we talked about earlier, we had them on there. 41st Street from Sertoma to Ellis Road includes incentives. And also, we're also using them this year on 2nd Avenue downtown, the intersection of 8th and Cliff, the concrete repairs on 12th Street between Kiwanis and Carolyn, and then Russell Street also has incentives. And so that's another way that we can incentivize these contracts to get them done ahead of schedule. And I had a conversation with a contractor this morning, and it costs money. They pay a lot of overtime. Instead of working maybe Saturdays for 4 hours, I know last year at 57th and Western, they worked every Saturday for 10 hours. So it does, and if typically our incentives, kind of the standard is about 5% of the contract amount. But $1,000 a day doesn't pay for overtime and additional fuel and things like that. So in some cases, we're up to $10,000 a day. But it's worked out well. The contractor at 57th and Western last year got every day except one. And then, of course, the next question may be, well, are we paying a premium for that incentive? And I don't think so. I think a lot of times if you did not complete that project a month ahead of time and you went the month extra without the incentives, I think that's probably where you would see our bids coming in. Like this year, there isn't a lot of work. There's a lot of city work, but there isn't a lot of state work. And so when there isn't a lot of work, you have more bidders. The bids are more competitive. And maybe their margin is a lot less. Maybe it's 5%, but they're not. I think as the incentives take place and they get farther along in the project, maybe their margins now go up from 5% maybe to 6 or 7% because they know they're going to get some more of that back towards the end. So they've worked well here. So I would recommend we keep using them when it's right. And I know most of the time when I'm in front of you talking about construction projects, we just talk about the bid. Or you guys, I know every week you get the bid results and you look at the numbers, the estimate versus what the low bid is. I broke down the costs on 41st Street just to kind of show you what happens with all of this. The engineering design work was $635,000 for 41st Street. Then the additional right-of-way we needed to construct the road was approximately $584,000. There's a lot of drainage issues we're dealing with and taking care of this year. So we did buy out some properties out there. That was $1.181 million to buy those out. The construction, the low bid was about $8.5 million. You add the $400,000 incentive on there, you're at $8.9. And then the engineering construction services are $763,000 for a total project cost of just over $12 million. And granted, that's been spread out over a 4-year period, but it's a big project, and it's much more than a mile of road, because we're doing work at both intersections on both ends, so that in the future, when it's time to go north on Ellis Road or south on Ellis Road, we can leave 41st Street open and just take off and go south or north. So, every year when we have our right-of-way money in our capital plan, well, here's an example of where we've spent some of that money that you probably don't see all the time. So, and then finally, our arterial street improvements project is a pooled project, and we'd work with the development community and the businesses in town and others to develop this priority list. And then projects are in different stages, and I'll go through that in a little bit more here, but you could have some in preliminary design like 41st Street was in 2010. You could have some in final design, and you could have some in construction. And then once we develop the list, we bid things per that list, and that's the order they get bid on, and it's all based on available funding. And like this year, when the contract was awarded to D&G Concrete Construction for 41st Street, then the funds are transferred out of the pooled project, and then a new capital project is created, which is the 41st Street project, and they're transferred in there, and that's how the bills are paid once the construction happens. Here's really our arterial street priority list. 41st Street is in construction. Maple Street out by the new school is in final design. That'll be bid this spring. The utilities and grading on Sycamore Avenue south of 57th, final design is wrapping up, and that'll be bidding here in the near future. We're also working on the 85th Street connection between Cliff and Minnesota, and this is more of a rural road that will just be paving, but it's in design. I don't know if we'll have available funding to do it this year, but if we do, we will certainly bid it. But if something, last year, for example, we wanted to do 10th and Sycamore in 13, and there was some delays with right-of-way, so we had to push it back a year. In this case, if something happened on Sycamore that had to delay that, we'd have 85th Street ready to go. And so we'd put that money to use on a high priority project. And then finally, next year's probably flagship project is Cliff Avenue from, I'll say 69th down to 85th or 63rd down to 85th. And I know the preliminary engineering work was done on that project probably 5 years ago. But it's in final design, and so we can get it bid in early in 2015 and get a good price and get that project constructed. So with that, that's what I have today, and I'll certainly entertain and try to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Councilor Karski.
Chad, my question's really specific to 41st Street. I know we're going to be diverting traffic out there south to 57th and north to 12th, preferably. 26th Street's kind of a residential road. How are we going to deter trucks going to the landfill from going down 26th Street? Is that even possible to do? They cut, just go north of 26th and back to the TL.
Our detour routes are 12th, 26th, and 57th. We're just going to have to monitor. Yesterday we were out day one. I think our message got out to the west side of Sioux Falls because we didn't close the road till I think 8:30, so they had some time for the morning to commute to get out, and there wasn't a lot of traffic on 41st, but we did have Heath and his group out at 12th and Sertoma, 26th and Marion, actually seeing what was happening so they can make some adjustments. We'll just have to monitor that. I know there's some trucks that have been driving probably too fast on 42nd Street, which is outside the city limits. So we just have to monitor that and see what we can do to control it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Counselor Jameson.
Chad, the lane, the 41st Street improvement, is that a 5-lane road?
It'll be a 4-lane road with a median, but then, you know, at the intersections, there'll be turn lanes.
And then, and then did I do the math right? It's $1 million a block for that kind of work? Including the intersections I know, which are heavy on each end, but is that about?
Yeah, I don't know what you're using for a distance of a block, but.
Did you say it's over a mile, the whole?
Well, I mean, I think if you added up the length, I mean, the number, you know, I kind of think about, you know, these arterial streets are probably $5 to $6 million a mile. So when I saw the estimate, I was, you know, I went, wow, that's a lot of money. But then, of course, we're doing concrete joint repairs north of 41st and then east of Sycamore. Plus, we're doing the reconstruction of that intersection at 41st and Sertoma, plus the intersection of 41st and Ellis. Then and then there's a lot of drainage work. We're going to be constructing 2 ponds on the south side of 41st Street. That'll be to accommodate the drainage off of 41st Street, and also it'll take into some of the count as that basin farther south of there develops. So.
Oh, what I'm hearing is this is a more elaborate job, and it's more than other arterial roads that you do.
You know, I think typically we would probably not do the intersection of 41st and Ellis on a typical arterial street expansion. But in this case, with 41st Street being that major route to the landfill, we felt it was appropriate to do that additional work at this time so that when we have to go north and south on Ellis, 41st Street's wide open.
Big deal. Yeah, it's a big project. One other question on scheduling. Last season with 57th and Western, a lot of traffic was diverted from Western, 69th and Western over to 69th and Minnesota, or 57th and Minnesota. Anyway, a lot of traffic sent down Minnesota Avenue and over to Louise. And then during one of those times, I saw a contractor do, somebody like gas or electric or cable, somebody set up a construction or moving some lines along Minnesota, shifted down and decreased it down to 1 lane, and I heard from a lot of those people, and I was one of those people driving through that, wondering how that could happen, that when during a detour like that all of a sudden a private contractor would step in and create a bottleneck for us. How could we, do you have any ideas of maybe how we could prevent that from happening?
Well, every private utility company has to get a permit.
They do.
From us. Now, there has been instances when their permit, I'll say, or maybe the description they give us of the work maybe doesn't include all of the limits. And I know specifically, I think about this, the one on, I think I know the one you're talking about. They were doing work. I mean, it was a large project they were doing, and they were in a junction box or a manhole, not at 57th in Minnesota, but then all of a sudden they determined, oh, something's not right here, and they started following this problem back, and then boom, the problem was in a manhole or a junction box at 57th in Minnesota. And so that was never the scope of their work limit or their work limits, but something came up, and we quickly got them out of there. And so it's the same thing with even our tech creek crews or something we're going to do. We just have to be communicating with the street department and say, no, we can't techrete now, or we can't do this utility repair unless it's absolutely emergency. We got to wait because that's where the majority of the traffic's going. And so it's just that one instance was there was really no fault. There was an issue, they had to deal with it, and once we were notified, though, they were done. So.
Other questions for Chad? I have one, Chad. Can liquidated damages and disincentives both be applied to a project?
That's a great question. Yes, and let's just talk about, we'll talk about 41st and Sertoma. There is an disincentive on getting that intersection done. So if they did not get that done, there would be an incentive or a disincentive. Let's just say they don't, and there's a disincentive. And then let's just say the overall project completion date, they don't meet that. So there could potentially be a disincentive for that particular phase, and then there could also be liquidated damages after that. Now, we've never run into that. You know, I think most of the times the incentive, disincentive would be what we pursue, but we just haven't run into this before. We've never had to use a disincentive, I should say that. I don't believe we had on the projects we've used it before, so usually the incentive is there to get them going, and it's usually been successful.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jameson.
Sorry, I did have one. The idea of using 24/7 construction cycles, you know, bigger cities do that. I know there's probably areas of town that it's allowed and other places it wouldn't be, but can you just refresh our memory of what those parameters are?
First of all, we're not that big to do that. We did a couple years ago. We did an overlay on Louise Avenue from 41st down to 49th, and that was done at night. But of course, it's asphalt, so you know we could close it at 10 o'clock at night, do a lane or two, and by 6 o'clock in the morning it was back open. Now, a couple years ago, we did an overlay on 41st Street, and we bid it night work, and the price was very high, so we had to rebid it using the day. Now, you know, I think it just doesn't work around here if you have one contractor that needs concrete. You know, now you're hauling 10 or 12 loads during the night, and it just doesn't pay. I think at some point we'll get to a point where we're big enough where, you know, maybe we'll have 3 or 4 construction projects going on at night. But once again, it's not going to work in a residential neighborhood. So now utility work would potentially be different because you don't need concrete, you don't need asphalt. Maybe you have the pipe there, but typically at this point, if you're going to have an asphalt plant open till 2 in the morning, it's the same guys that opened it at 6 in the morning. You know, probably at some point we'll get to a population where they'll maybe run 2 shifts at a concrete plant, or they'll run 2 shifts at a hot mix plant for asphalt. But yeah, you'll see that in Minneapolis or in the larger cities, but we're just not to that point yet.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Chad. Very informative presentation.
Thank you.
We're now to the point of the agenda for open discussion. Anything that the committee would like to bring forward? Councilor Entenmann.
I would like to thank you, Sue. I think this could possibly be the last committee meeting of this committee. And as chair and as a participant, I'd like to thank you for your service here, both at this committee and also at the council level. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other open discussion? Councilor Jameson.
I couldn't resist either adding a comment, you know, of new beginnings, and with maybe just a little luck, some of us will have new beginnings as well, but you've got a new beginning for you coming up here in a short order, and I know family is a big part of that, and I know you spent a lot of time on the city council and a lot of meetings and going to places. I hope all that extra time gets to be spent with your family, and I hope you enjoy that.
Thank you very much. I would take a motion now for adjournment.
So move, Entenmann.
Second.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor to adjourn signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. This meeting is adjourned.